The year is 776 BCE, and this is the first year of the Olympic Games. Not the Olympics you know. There are no flags, no anthems, no medals waiting in velvet boxes. There is only dust underfoot, the heat of the Greek sun, and the quiet understanding that something new is about to begin. People have traveled for days to reach this place. Some came by foot along narrow mountain paths, others by boat, crossing the Ionian Sea before walking inland. They arrive carrying little more than cloaks, oil flasks, and stories from their home cities. They are not here for spectacle. They are here because this land has been declared sacred, and for a brief moment in time, the world has been asked to pause. This place is Olympia, tucked into a wide valley in the western Peloponnese. Olympia is not a city. It has no permanent population, no walls, no market streets buzzing with trade. It exists only for ritual. Olive trees grow thick along the banks of the Alpheus River. The air smells of grass, dust, and smoke from small offerings burning near stone altars. At the center of it all stands the sanctuary of Zeus, king of the gods. The reason for the gathering is simple and profound. Greece is not a single nation. It is a patchwork of city-states, each proud, each competitive, many locked in cycles of rivalry and war. Yet every 4 years, messengers are sent across the Greek world carrying a declaration known as the sacred truce. During this time, hostilities are set aside. Safe passage is granted. No weapons are raised on the roads leading to Olympia. For a few days, conflict gives way to competition. The games are held to honor Zeus, and that honor is not symbolic. Every event, every rule, every ritual is designed to please the gods and reflect human excellence. Victory is not about wealth or reward. It is about glory, memory, and being seen by both mortals and immortals. The earliest contest is simple. A single race, one length of the stadium, roughly 200 meters. No armor, no shoes, just speed, breath, and resolve. The men who will run today have trained without knowing whether their names will ever be remembered. They have prepared their bodies with discipline and restraint. They have sworn oaths before the statue of Zeus, promising fairness, honesty, and respect for the rules. The crowd gathers along the dirt track, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the open sky. There are no seats, no shade, no separation between athlete and observer. Everyone is close enough to hear the rasp of breathing, to see the tension in each runner's stance. When the signal is given, the runners surge forward, feet striking earth, dust rising in the air. For moments that feel suspended outside of time, nothing exists except motion. When it ends, one man will be remembered. Not with gold, but with a wreath of olive leaves cut from a sacred tree, a simple crown placed gently on his head. Its value lies not in its material, but in what it represents. His name will be spoken. And with that, history quietly begins. Olympia was chosen not because it was powerful, but because it was neutral. In a land defined by borders, rivalries, and the constant tension between city-states, neutrality mattered. Greece in this era was not united by a single ruler or law. It was a mosaic of independent cities, each fiercely protective of its identity, its gods, and its honor. War was not an exception, but a condition of life, something expected to return again and again like the changing seasons. Yet Olympia existed apart from all of this. It belonged to no single city. No army claimed it. No walls rose around it. The valley was open, exposed, and deliberately unclaimed. Its power came not from force, but from agreement, a shared understanding that this land was set aside for something higher than politics or conquest. Long before the first Olympic race, Olympia had already been sacred. For generations, people traveled here to honor Zeus. They came not as citizens of rival cities, but as worshippers. The sanctuary grew slowly, shaped by repetition rather than ambition. Stone altars were placed where offerings had been made for centuries. Sacred groves were protected, their olive trees left undisturbed, their branches whispering in the wind as they had long before human memory. There was no grand city to announce arrival, no gates to pass through. Olympia revealed itself gradually. A clearing, a path, the smell of smoke from burnt offerings, the sound of water moving nearby. The land did not overwhelm visitors. It invited them to slow down. At the heart of the sanctuary stood the presence of Zeus. Not yet the towering statue that would later be counted among the wonders of the world, but a spiritual authority that required no monument to be felt. Zeus was the guarantor of oaths, the watcher of justice, the god who punished excess and rewarded balance. To gather in his name was to acknowledge limits, to strength, to ambition, to power itself. This is why the games mattered. They were not created for entertainment. They were an offering. Every aspect of the Olympic Games was structured as a form of devotion. The competitions honored Zeus by displaying human excellence in its most disciplined form. Strength was not wild. Speed was not reckless. Victory was not accidental. Each athlete was expected to embody control, restraint, and harmony between body and mind. Before the games began, rituals filled the sanctuary. Animals were brought forward for sacrifice. Prayers were spoken aloud. The smell of burning offerings rose into the open sky. These moments were solemn, not celebratory. They reminded everyone present that the games were taking place under divine observation. Oaths were sworn before the statue of Zeus. Athletes promised to compete honestly. Judges promised to rule fairly. These vows were binding not because of punishment alone, but because breaking them risked divine retribution. To cheat at Olympia was not merely to gain an unfair advantage. It was to offend the gods themselves. Those who violated the rules were remembered, but not as champions. Fines collected from cheaters funded the creation of statues placed within the sanctuary. These figures stood as permanent reminders of failure, their inscriptions detailing the offense committed. Long after the athlete's name might have faded, their dishonor remained carved in stone. The land absorbed these stories. As the days of the games approached, Olympia transformed. Temporary shelters appeared along the edges of the sanctuary. Visitors slept under open skies or beneath simple coverings. There were no inns, no formal accommodations. Comfort was secondary to presence. Everyone endured the same heat, the same dust, the same exposure to the elements. The climate shaped the experience. The sun pressed down relentlessly during the day. Shade was rare. Water was precious. The physical strain of simply being there mirrored the demands placed upon the athletes themselves. Olympia did not separate observer from participant. Everyone shared the conditions of the moment. Time at Olympia moved differently. There was no rush, no strict schedule measured in hours and minutes. The rhythm of the games followed rituals, daylight, and readiness. Days unfolded through sacrifice, competition, rest, and conversation. Stories were exchanged between strangers who, outside the sanctuary, might have been enemies. For a brief period, identity shifted. Men were no longer defined solely by their city of origin. They became witnesses, competitors, participants in something larger than themselves. The sacred truce ensured safe passage, not because it was enforced by soldiers, but because it was believed in. To violate it would have been unthinkable. Olympia became a pause in history, a place where conflict was suspended, not resolved, where excellence replaced violence, where memory was forged through shared experience rather than domination. This sacred ground did not promise peace beyond its borders, but within the valley, beneath the olive trees and open sky, peace was practiced. And for the first time in 776 BCE, that practice took on a new form, one measured not by sacrifice alone, but by competition. The ground was ready. The world had arrived. To compete in the Olympic Games was not a decision made lightly. For an athlete, the path toward Olympia often began years before the journey itself. It started quietly in local gymnasiums and open training grounds scattered throughout the Greek world. These were simple places, stretches of packed earth, shaded courtyards, open fields, where bodies were shaped through repetition rather than spectacle. Training followed no single formula. Each athlete learned through discipline and observation. Movements were repeated until they became instinctive. Strength was built gradually, not through excess, but through balance. Endurance mattered more than brute force. Control mattered more than aggression. The body was treated as both instrument and offering. Diet was monitored carefully. Meals were plain and functional, designed to sustain effort rather than indulgence. Wine was limited. Excess was discouraged. Every habit carried consequence, and athletes learned quickly that neglect showed itself in performance. Training was public. There were no private arenas hidden from view. Athletes trained where others could watch, comment, and judge. Coaches corrected posture and technique openly. Progress was visible. So were mistakes. Reputation formed slowly, shaped by consistency rather than sudden displays of talent. Injury was always a possibility. Without modern medicine, even small wounds could end a career before it began. Athletes learned caution alongside courage. They listened to their bodies, adjusting effort when strain appeared. Rest was not weakness, it was survival. Those who aspired to Olympia knew the journey would be demanding. Weeks before the Games, athletes traveled to Elis, the region responsible for overseeing the Olympics. There, under the supervision of judges, they trained together, adapting to the climate and terrain. This period served as both preparation and examination. Only those deemed ready were permitted to continue on to Olympia itself. Participation was not guaranteed. Athletes were required to prove not only physical ability, but character. The Games were sacred, and behavior mattered. Discipline, respect, and restraint were valued as highly as strength or speed. On the day of competition, adornment was stripped away. Athletes competed without clothing, a practice that symbolized honesty rather than exhibition. Nothing was hidden. Every muscle, every movement, every flaw was visible. The body was presented as it was, trained, vulnerable, and human. Oil was applied to the skin. It protected against the sun and highlighted the form, making motion easier to observe. Sand and dust clung to the body as competition unfolded, grounding athletes in the physical reality of the moment. The stadium itself offered no comfort. There were no seats, no barriers separating spectators from competitors. The track was simple, marked by lines pressed into the earth. The crowd stood close enough to hear breath catch in the throat, to see tension settle into shoulders before the start. There were no second chances, no preliminary rounds, no appeals. Victory belonged to the one who performed best in that single moment. Defeat was final, accepted without ceremony. Winning brought recognition, but not immediate celebration. At Olympia, the prize was modest, a wreath of olive leaves cut from a sacred tree. It held no monetary value. Its significance came from where it was earned and who had witnessed it. The true reward came later. Victors returned home as symbols of excellence. Cities welcomed them with feasts and songs. Some granted lifelong privileges, free meals, or prominent positions. Statues were commissioned. Poets composed verses. Names were recorded, carried forward through memory and repetition. Yet fame was never permanent. A single victory did not guarantee lasting honor. Each Olympiad brought new champions. Each generation produced new contenders. Glory required renewal. For many athletes, participation itself was enough. To stand at Olympia, to compete under open sky in honor of Zeus, was a fulfillment of purpose. It marked a life shaped by discipline and devotion. The athlete's life was not one of ease. It demanded patience, restraint, and acceptance of uncertainty. Success was never promised, only the opportunity to strive. And in that striving, the Olympic Games found their meaning. But the athlete's life did not begin or end on the track. Outside the moments of competition, There were long stretches of waiting, hours spent stretching muscles beneath open skies, quiet conversations with fellow competitors from distant cities, shared meals eaten slowly, each bite measured, each moment steeped in awareness. Athletes listened as much as they trained. They listened to older competitors who had returned to Olympia before, to coaches who spoke of timing, restraint, and the dangers of excess confidence, to priests who reminded them that effort mattered, but the humility mattered more. Sleep came early and lightly. Nights were spent on simple bedding, bodies sore from preparation, minds restless with anticipation. The sounds of the sanctuary carried through the dark. Murmured prayers, footsteps on packed earth, the distant crackle of fires burning low. Even rest felt purposeful. The pressure of expectation was quiet but constant. Athletes carried not only their own ambitions, but the hopes of their cities. They knew that their performance would reflect on families, mentors, and communities who had supported them. Failure was personal, but it was also public. Yet there was also freedom in this exposure. With nothing hidden, pretense fell away. Each competitor faced the same conditions, the same sun, the same dust. There were no advantages beyond preparation and composure. Age offered no protection. Some competitors were young, still learning the limits of their strength. Others were seasoned, their bodies marked by years of training. Experience brought calm, but not certainty. The track treated all equally. Between events, athletes observed the games unfolding. They watched others succeed and fail. They learned by witnessing technique and mistake alike. Each contest became a lesson, absorbed quietly, stored away for future use. For many, Olympia marked a turning point. A victory could open doors that had previously been closed. A loss could signal the end of a long pursuit. Some would return home and train again. Others would step away, carrying the experience as a memory rather than a milestone. The athlete's identity did not rest solely on winning. It rested on having prepared, having stood in the sacred valley, having measured oneself honestly against others under the gaze of gods and mortals alike. This understanding shaped lives long after the games ended. Even those who never wore the olive wreath carried Olympia with them. The discipline learned there influenced how they worked, how they governed, how they endured hardship. The Olympic Games shaped not only champions, but citizens. And as the athletes prepared themselves, unseen forces were already at work. Forces that would expand the games beyond a single race, beyond a single generation. What began as a single race could not remain small. As years passed and Olympiads repeated, the gathering at Olympia grew in confidence and complexity. The original foot race remained at the heart of the games, but it no longer stood alone. New contests were introduced, each reflecting a different expression of human ability. Longer races were added, testing endurance as much as speed. Wrestlers entered the stadium, their contests measured not by elegance, but by control and dominance. Boxing followed, raw and punishing, a reminder that strength carried risk as well as glory. Later came the pentathlon, 5 events combined into a single test: running, jumping, discus throwing, javelin throwing, and wrestling. Victory in the pentathlon required balance rather than specialization. It rewarded athletes who could adapt, who understood rhythm, timing, and restraint. As the games expanded, so did their duration. What had once taken a single day stretched into several. Each day followed a familiar pattern: sacrifice in the morning, competition under the sun, rest and conversation in the evening. The sanctuary filled with voices, footsteps, and shared anticipation. Temporary structures multiplied. Shelters rose along the edges of the sacred space. Paths grew worn under repeated use. The landscape itself began to change, shaped by the steady return of visitors every 4 years. Olympia remained without walls, yet it was no longer quiet. With growth came tension. City-states began to view Olympic victories as symbols of prestige. A champion's success reflected not only individual excellence, but the perceived strength of their homeland. Rivalries sharpened. Victories were remembered, compared, and counted. Yet the sacred truce endured. Even as wars flared elsewhere, Olympia maintained its role as neutral ground. Messengers traveled across Greece, announcing the suspension of hostilities. Roads remained open. Weapons were left behind. The belief in the truce proved stronger than the impulse toward conflict. This shared commitment transformed the games into more than competition. They became a measure of time. Years were recorded by Olympiads. Events were remembered in relation to past games. Memory organized itself around this recurring gathering, anchoring history to a rhythm that outlasted individual lives. Artists and storytellers took notice. Poets celebrated champions in verse. Sculptors captured idealized forms in stone and bronze. Victorious athletes commissioned statues that stood within the sanctuary, silent witnesses to past excellence. These images did not depict moments of struggle, but moments of balance. The body at rest, perfected through effort. The games influenced education and philosophy. Ideas of harmony between mind and body gained prominence. Physical training became associated with moral character. Discipline in movement mirrored discipline in thought. Excellence was understood as something cultivated over time, not granted by chance. As the centuries passed, the Olympic Games grew into a pan-Hellenic institution. People traveled from distant regions, drawn by reputation as much as tradition. Olympia became a meeting place where ideas circulated alongside competition. Alliances formed, disputes softened, shared identity emerged, fragile but real. Yet expansion brought vulnerability. Political interests crept closer. Powerful leaders sought influence. The purity of the games was tested as wealth and ambition pressed against tradition. Rules were tightened. Oversight increased. The sanctuary adapted in order to preserve itself. Despite these pressures, the core endured. The games remained sacred. They remained a space where human excellence was measured publicly, witnessed collectively, and remembered deliberately. they remained an interval in history when violence was set aside in favor of competition. With each Olympiad, Olympia reaffirmed its purpose, not as a spectacle, but as a ritual, not as entertainment, but as memory in motion. And as the games expanded beyond their humble beginning, they carried with them the values that had shaped their first race: balance, restraint, and reverence. As the crowds grew, so did the awareness that Olympia was becoming something rare. In a world defined by shifting alliances and fragile truces, the Games offered continuity. Every 4 years, regardless of who ruled or which cities were at war elsewhere, the same rituals were performed in the same valley. Fires were lit, oaths were spoken. Athletes stepped onto the same earth their predecessors had known. This repetition mattered. It created familiarity across generations. Fathers spoke of games they had witnessed in their youth. Elders recalled champions whose names were still spoken decades later. Memory stretched backward through Olympiads, forming an unbroken line that connected the present to the distant past. The sanctuary absorbed these layers of time. Paths deepened, altars darkened with soot from countless sacrifices. Statues accumulated, each one marking a victory that had once felt immediate and urgent. Together, they formed a quiet archive of human effort. Even the silences carried meaning. Between events, the valley settled into calm. Athletes rested, spectators sought shade, conversations softened. The absence of constant motion allowed reflection to take root. Olympia was as much about stillness as it was about competition. The judges who oversaw the games understood this balance. They enforced rules not to control spectacle, but to protect ritual. Their authority came from tradition, reinforced by belief. Decisions were final, accepted without appeal, not because they were flawless, but because the structure itself was trusted. As Olympia's reputation spread, its influence reached beyond athletics. Ideas about fairness, order, and excellence traveled outward with returning visitors. Cities adopted training practices inspired by Olympic preparation. Philosophers drew metaphors from competition to explain discipline and virtue. The games quietly shaped how people understood effort and reward. Yet Olympia never claimed to perfect the world. It offered no solutions to conflict beyond its borders. It promised no lasting peace. Its power lay instead in demonstration, in showing that rivalry could exist without violence, that honor could be earned without conquest. This example endured precisely because it was temporary. The games ended, the truce lifted, people returned to their lives. But the memory of what had been possible lingered, resurfacing with each Olympiad. In this way, expansion did not dilute the games. It reinforced them. The Olympic Games became larger, more complex, more visible. Yet they remained anchored to the same quiet valley and the same ancient understanding. That excellence, when witnessed and remembered, could shape culture without dominating it. Centuries pass. The rhythm that once anchored time begins to loosen. Olympiads continue, but the world around Olympia changes. Power shifts, borders harden and soften again. New ambitions rise alongside old traditions, pressing against them, reshaping them. The sanctuary endures, but it does not remain untouched. Stone replaces earth, temples grow larger, structures become permanent where once they were temporary. The valley that had welcomed silence now carries weight, political, cultural, symbolic. The Olympic Games persist through these changes. They adapt slowly, rules evolve, oversight increases. The simplicity of the earliest games gives way to ceremony layered upon ceremony. Yet even as form changes, the idea at the center remains recognizable. Human excellence witnessed, memory shared. For a long time, that is enough. But nothing remains unchanged forever. As foreign powers extend their reach across Greece, the meaning of Olympia shifts. What was once a gathering of equals becomes a stage observed by rulers and empires. The games continue, but the sacred truce weakens. Belief competes with authority. Ritual competes with spectacle. Eventually, the ancient world begins to fade. Beliefs that sustain the games lose their hold. Temples fall quiet. Altars go cold. When the Olympic Games finally cease, they do not end in a moment of drama or collapse. They simply stop being held. The valley grows still. Grass creeps back across the track. Paths soften. Statues weather and fall. Olive trees continue to grow, indifferent to the absence of crowds. Time does what it always does. It covers, it erodes, it forgets. For centuries, Olympia exists only as a name, a reference in texts, a memory carried imperfectly through fragments and retellings. The rituals, once precise and embodied, become abstract, and yet the idea does not disappear. The belief that competition can replace conflict, that excellence deserves recognition, that shared ritual can unite people across divisions. These ideas persist, resurfacing in different forms, in different eras. When the modern world looks back toward Olympia, it does so through layers of distance. Archaeology replaces memory. Reconstruction replaces participation. Stones are measured. Foundations mapped. History is pieced together from what remains. The ancient Olympic Games are not revived as they were. They cannot be. The world that created them no longer exists. The beliefs that sustained them have shifted. What returns instead is an echo, inspired by the past, shaped by the present. Yet echoes matter. They remind us that the desire to pause, to gather, to measure ourselves without violence is not new. It has been attempted before. The first Olympic Games were not designed to last forever. They were designed to return. Again and again, across generations, as long as belief held. What remains is not the race itself. It is the choice behind it. The choice to set aside conflict, even briefly. The choice to value discipline over domination. The choice to remember excellence without demanding conquest. In the quiet valley of Olympia, that choice was practiced, not once, but many times. And each time It left a mark. Today, when we speak of the Olympics, we often think of scale, of crowds, of ceremony broadcast across the world. Yet beneath all of that lies something far older and far quieter. A memory of dust beneath bare feet, a wreath of olive leaves, a pause in history. The ancient Olympic Games remind us that civilization is shaped not only by what endures, but by what is repeated, by rituals that return, by moments that ask us to be better, even if only for a while. And though the valley is silent now, the choice made there continues to surface whenever people gather not to conquer, but to compete, not to dominate, but to measure themselves honestly. That is what remains. And that is why the first Olympic Games are still remembered.